Okay, this better be recording this time, my voice, because this is my third time through this presentation. All right, so questions that kill a piece of my teacher's soul. Is this for a grade? What is this worth? How long does this have to be? All of these questions were questions that plagued me for years. Why? Because it was always about the carrot and not about the learning. It was always about, more important to them, what they received, not necessarily that they had gotten anything out of it. And especially when you get, what is this worth? If the this was just like, if it was an object as opposed to a learning opportunity, then maybe I could stomach it a little more. I had a conversation several years back with an AP class about what did they think was more important, the grade or the learning, and all of them across the board said the grade, because they felt that that is what that's how they got to college, was about the grade. That's how they were going to be successful, was because of the grade. And it didn't matter that they were cruel to each other, were stepping all over each other, were dishonest. And that really bothered me on so many levels. But the number one that I felt was the most damaging was that they didn't see that learning for learning's sake would be important to them. And so I started doing research at that time about like what else could be done, what works and what doesn't. And so that led me to where I went this year. I started off with a quiz, and I'm not going to go into it. I can show you someday. But the cool thing is that it ends up with the what if. And that's what is so important. What if, instead of always saying no, instead of saying this is how we've always done it, what if we said, what if it looked differently? What if we could have rigorous classroom that didn't give traditional grades? Is that possible? And what if we played with that? And that's kind of what led me to the direction that I went this year. And I was fortunate because I had you who was willing to entertain my what if, and I believe also sees the value in trying something different. So my question was, what does it take to get students to move beyond being a checkbox learner who works only for a grade to a more engaged, risk-taking, and reflective learner who is able to authentically assess themselves? And that's really what I wanted. What, as opposed to, is this right? Is this enough? Does this look good? What do I have to do? How long does it have to be? All these questions that have nothing to do with them being able to identify and articulate their own learning. And also that traditional grades or compliance mechanisms that we use don't encourage kids to take risks. They're too afraid of failing that they don't challenge themselves. They just want to do what's easy. And I wanted to see that change. So I dove into who's already doing it. So I follow an incredible Facebook group called Teachers Throwing Out Grades, and they are K through college classrooms that are doing this right now, are not using traditional methods, are using just a variety of methods that are non-traditional, and mostly around feedback and different types of feedback. And I read stuff from them every day. And then there's Role Reversal, which is results-only learning environment, and this amazing book by Mark Barnes. And that was a high school English class where they are consistently reading and writing and revising, and the only time the grade goes in is when they sit down together. He and the students sit down together and decide, okay, this is the grade that belongs in there, and the why. And then there's standards-based grading, which I know that Paolo does. It's still pretty checkboxy for my taste, but I believe it's better and focuses more on the competencies and skills, which again is still for me a little bit checkboxy and chunked, but better than the traditional carrot and stick. The research shows that traditional grading is demotivating because they're so afraid. Internal motivation produces deeper thinking, which I believe we kind of know that as educators, but we usually don't put structures in place that encourage it. feedback is better than grades, and that is on the really famous study where they gave students the grade back and they didn't show any growth because a grade is a period, right? Like you see the grade, you're like, oh, that's the end of it. They gave students grade and feedback, and again, the same results as with the grade. And then they gave students just feedback, and they found when they had just feedback, they were willing to read and apply that feedback because they didn't see the grade. They didn't see it as a done deal already. And that's what I wanted to tap into, and that it was consistent and intentional reflection is key. And that is one thing that I firmly believe and struggled with probably the most throughout the entire year. So round one, I created the student-created rubrics. It was more of a reflection tool than it was a grading tool, and I know you've seen this. So it had the 4 quadrants, and I gave them questions to really kind of consider, and then each student kept a like an Excel spreadsheet where it had the list of those 4 quadrants on this side, and then for each assignment they completed a little reflective assessment of themselves. This is obviously a really good one. I noticed that not all students, in fact, most students, were not this apt at providing authentic feedback about themselves or for themselves. And so I created a kind of color-coded like method where it would be like claim, evidence, support. I thought that way they could practice argument skills that were really good that we needed, as well as reflective skills, and that helped tremendously. I stuck with this really strongly through the first quarter. And then it was just too much to keep up with. And because I was implementing so many other things, which I'll get into, it sadly went away. And it's something that I would like to bring back and be more intentional with in the future. So what I learned, this was way too far out of their comfort zone. Students were so used to way more like structure and compliance that they had no idea. They needed direction and structure. They needed a standard to gauge themselves. They needed that floor. Like this is the floor. This is as low as I'm willing to let you go. And I needed a way to translate grades into the grade book so that way teachers and parents and students themselves could kind of get an understanding that the work that we were doing was important work, even though it wasn't in like for grade in the grade book. So into round 2. That was single point rubrics, grading codes, and performance evaluations. So I love single point rubrics because it sets the floor but no ceiling, and that is really important to me. I have always been adverse to where the rubric exceeded the expectations or how they were exceptional. I thought it was more important for students to be able to articulate the ways that they went above and beyond themselves. And that's going to look different for individual students. And I wanted to be able to give space for different ways that students excel, because we know that they really can. And so that was really important to me. And also their ability to identify how they're not there yet is also important. If I'm telling them it's not on them, if they are identifying it and telling it to me, then they're taking ownership of how either they are not there yet or how they have exceeded those. One of the most successful ones that I used was the Socratic Seminar single point rubric. And this was kind of tricky because if I am focusing on growth over time, on your ability to revise, how do you do that if you're doing a Socratic seminar? And so I created the rubric, and for each, we did 3 weeks of seminars based on the Federalist Papers. And students read 5 different Federalist and anti-Federalist papers. And so for the first round, we went over the rubric. They read and annotated and wrote levels of questions. And then we came together, and each person had a partner. And so there were 2 circles, inner and outer. And the outer circle was their partner who was just looking at and writing feedback for them on the rubric. And then they switched, and then they needed to look at the rubric and score themselves, and they turned in their annotations and their rubric and all their feedback to me. And then for the next round, so then I wrote down all their feedback and gave them either a work in progress. I think only like maybe 2 people met the expectation for the first round. Most of them got works in progress. And all their feedback was in PowerSchool. But also I created a cover sheet that had my feedback at the top. The next question was where did you succeed? And based on my feedback and their own self-reflection, they wrote down where they succeeded. And then the next question was where are growing points? And then the last one was what's a goal you're going to set for yourself for the next one? And so I had them do that. And then the next round, I gave them back those forms and they wrote their goal on the top of their new rubric so that when they were doing their second Socratic seminar, their partner could look at what their goal was and took notes directly on how they were meeting or not meeting that goal. And then we went through that several times. And the coolest thing was that the second round, I had only 2 people who didn't meet their goal. And the next 2 rounds, every single person met their goal. And the goal had to change each time. They had to up their game each time. So if your goal was, well, I'm going to use 1 of my talking chips, and that's your goal each time, that was not. You had to like, okay, next time I'm going to use 2, or I'm going to use all 3, or 1, I'm going to just make a statement, and the next time I'm going to ask a question. The one I used in my presentation was of Donovan, and he had established, he was one of the couple students who actually met the expectations right away. And so for him, for his goal for himself was that he would help other people be more part of the conversation. And so that was the goal that he had set. And then he met that. That was really cool. So that's what that all was about. The other thing I needed was a way to put something in the grade book. And so then I created the not started, which was, hey, I assigned this, the due date passed, you didn't even start it. WIP, which is my favorite, that's work in progress because learning is iterative. Always proud, never satisfied. And there's always room for growth. And so I like the idea of it being a work in progress. And then met the expectations. That means that you thoroughly were at the minimum, you met the expectations. And there was a single point rubric for all of the major assignments. Again, this was first semester. I also created a video, much like the one I'm creating now, but it was for, I recognized that I had to train teachers and parents, like, what am I looking at in PowerSchool? And I go through this entire video, and it's in my presentation, so you can look at it if you want to, but I sent this out to everybody. And it just talks through, like, here's what I'm looking at. And then something that was really important was if I was going to be accepting a lot of work at different times and different work coming in and going back out, coming in and going back out, I needed a way to just manage that kind of paper load, especially if most of the work that they were doing and redoing were online, either their blog posts or they were papers that were shared with me in our online folder. And I didn't want to get 10 million different emails. And so what I created was a revision alert form, which was just an online form that they filled out every time they were missing an assignment. And so, or they were revising an assignment and they told me which class they were in, what assignment it was by title, or if it was a blog post, they would copy and paste it in there. And then what's something specific you want me to look at? And then a success, as you see right here, there were 187 revision forms submitted this year. So many of those were during the second semester. I don't know what happened at Christmas, but it just like we took off second semester and kids came back really ready to kind of give me a shot and themselves a shot at that, which was really cool. One thing that I noticed before Christmas break was just the sheer number of students that were willing to not complete their work. And it honestly was mind-boggling to me. I never had that percentage. And I had to understand why. What was it about class or school or I don't know that was creating this? And so I created the homework inquiry, and I know I gave this to you. But one of the major things that stood out, and I know you focused on Milo's response, which actually also ties into the number one response that came across the board. And that was that math scared them so much, or because there was like this hardcore grade in math, and that they felt like if they missed an assignment, or that they were constantly trying to climb out of a hole, or that it would be impossible to get out of the hole, that's where all their focus went. And you could see over and over again, that's where their focus went. That's where their focus went. Sadly, it was more out of fear than anything else. And that was clearly articulated. Or that's where they felt like, well, I struggle the most here, and I don't know, like, it just felt like this constant hole that they were trying to climb out of. And so that was great information for me, and how I could help them see that, like, it doesn't have to be a hole. And but and at the same time, that NS is the same way of digging yourself into a hole, because you're not going to have the evidence that you need at the end of this semester when I meet you for a performance evaluation. So the performance evaluations was was awesome. And I am so glad that I did this. It was tough to make time to meet with every single student, and totally worth it. So here's a list of what they had to come to me with, and what I would have. And I would take, I was really good at first semester at taking anecdotal notes of them. And then that changed second semester. There wasn't as much need for that as the relationships between us built, but I wanted them to know that I paid attention. And so I took meticulous anecdotal notes regularly first semester. And so we met and we talked. And it was really great for me to see students like Tegan or Mina or David, who aren't used to owning their greatness. They're not used to saying great things about themselves or where they're strong. And when they're sitting there with this amazing portfolio and are able to articulate to me, and having to like tell me, this is what I've earned and here's why, that was really wonderful. And then at the same point, when you have, I had Dominic that was like a B, and, and to be able to say, well, where's your evidence? And, well, I don't have any. And I'm like, well, then how can you support that argument? And so to really like have him have to say, well, I didn't earn it because I didn't do it. And I think that there's a lot of value in that for students to have to take ownership, when that's the other thing that traditional grades sets up, is that it really puts it on the teacher, right? The teacher doesn't like me, that's where I'm failing. It's all about like the teacher doing these things. Whereas when they are having to show you a portfolio of work and say, I earned this, and really be able to defend why and how, and when they can, because they realize that they did, and the ownership is on them, then they can't really blame the teacher. And I think that was really huge. It can't be because the teacher likes me or doesn't like me. It's because I worked really hard and here's how, or you know what, I didn't put that much effort in and it's showing. And there's way more value to that, I believe. So reflections and hard truths. So this was at my reflections at the end of first semester, and honestly, it was the most challenging semester for me in a long time, personally, professionally, physically. It was just really hard, and I felt like I was constantly chasing down their motivation and mine. And it was I felt just shocked at how, and I just had this very idealistic view of what was going on at City. And I didn't realize that even though there are these amazing projects and PBL is huge, that there are still some very traditional compliance-based structures in place. And the kids they're still trained to seek that carrot and stick. And that they were really unsure how to identify their own learning goals, articulate their growth, and tap into internal motivation. Like they just didn't have the words or the tools in order to do that. And the more that I started telling them or like expecting that of them, by after third quarter, fourth quarter was amazing, because almost 100% of them, even after Milo almost imploded, they just totally came around too. And it was amazing that they recognized that, wait, I can do this, and I do know how to articulate this, and this learning matters. And there were some real wins in that. The other challenges is that only 3 hours and 40 minutes a week with students in class was simply not enough. I kept wondering, why am I constantly trying to like chase down time, and why can I not dive into reflection? We have a block period, for crying out loud. And there wasn't enough time. And because students weren't doing a whole lot of work outside of class, I had to figure out how to capitalize on all that time within class, which meant that the reflection process really went kind of it kind of went to this to it didn't go the way that I wanted it to go. We just did not have the time for that reflective process. And that's like in my own, like I had set a goal for myself to journal at least 10 minutes a day at the end of each day, but I was always running to a meeting or getting out of class a half an hour later than everybody, or like there was always something. And so it was really hard to sit down and even myself be genuine and reflective. And by the time I did get to write about it, I had forgotten all about, like, I'd forgotten things that had happened in the day, or I was just focused on something like negative that happened. And that's an unfortunate personal habit, instead of all the positive that had happened. And so I wasn't practicing that reflective process either. And that was a bummer. That's a goal for me in the future. The one-to-one conversations, like I said, were great, and then creating that form for them to submit assignments. At the end of this semester, I didn't have the chance because of gateways to sit down and do one-to-one reflection, so I had them write. And things that I learned, and I'm going to read a couple in just a moment, so the hardest things for this year. So students who the game of school works really well for them, they struggled the most. The Cats and the Ericas, those are the ones that like they were used to just like, tell me what I need to do and I'm going to do it to that point. Don't ask more of me. And they were really frustrated until the last quarter, and then reflected on a lot of growth, which was good. And on the other end, students who it had been a while since they had felt academic success, or they weren't used to seeing themselves as academically successful, I had huge gains. Jake Carrillo and Fernando, they both didn't miss an assignment all second semester. They really stepped up and were following through, and I was getting good work. It wasn't just like work that they just pulled out of thin air. And for that, that was pretty impressive. I liked that a lot, and I felt like that alone was worth it. That the kids who played the game well, they were struggling because they only knew how to play the game, and it was good for them to struggle. And the kids who had never played the game well, and all of a sudden it didn't matter that they couldn't play the game because they were feeling success. They were realizing that they didn't have to, that they could learn at their pace in their time, and that they had opportunities to continue to redo work, which was really helpful. Unintentional success was helping them reflect on themselves as humans and not just as students. And I had some amazing feedback on that. And then it's really hard to be the lone wolf in the system. And although I will never go back to traditional grading, I just can't. I see too much value in going away from it. It sucks being one of the only ones on campus trying to do it. It's hard when kids are fighting very traditional systems, when they're asked to jump through hoop after hoop, and when their grades are being held over their heads. And I just never wanted that kind of power. And it's really hard to be one of the only ones in a system that's doing that. And so that was huge and challenging for me. I'm going to read a couple of their feedback. So I have 3 and you could read all of these. They were all really insightful, but these are just the ones I shared during my presentation. This is from Sienna. She said, "This is the first class ever that inspired me to look at my personal habits and reflect on my choices. My worldview and how I look at myself has changed dramatically." And I think that was just so huge. This is Isaiah. "I have participated in many things I did not want to, but you always said take a risk or something involving us being out of our comfort zone. It was usually about expressing truly ourselves and talking to others how different reality is in education. I may not have liked doing it, but I got the purpose behind it. I think I've always been aware of what the world truly holds in my life. I do like your way of teaching because it does give others the information of how diverse the world sees us. No more gold stars. And then also from him a little bit later in this. In your class, you want us to reflect on ourselves and the others in society. I think about this every day. It's nothing different. But I noticed people around have seen me as a different person since I've shown my perspective behind things. I don't know what people really think of me, but it's not the angry kid who wants to start fights with everyone anymore. I think that's one thing I'm grateful for in your class. It's nice to be seen as a person. And then last, this is Peyton. In all honesty, I used to dismiss a large group of students in school as stupid because they didn't know how to play the game right or just struggled with doing work. I thought that made them stupid people. However, now I see that they aren't stupid. Each of these people who I so ignorantly dismissed have so many different insights and perspectives that I wouldn't even think of. They are culminations of thoughts and experiences, some of which I've never had. So it makes sense that they can all be valuable. This was my motivator for learning how to be quiet and let others speak. I have grown so much as a learner, a human, and a student because of this class. And as I move forward, if there is one thing that I want more than anything, it's that right there. It's that I want all of them to be able to see each other in a different light and to see that no matter how we viewed someone, or maybe somebody's really quiet, or maybe they don't pick up on something right away, but that doesn't mean that they also don't have something to bring to the table. And I watched growth across the board happen because of that. And I just am not sure if that amount of growth can take place in a compliance-based classroom. So next year, I plan on not giving grades, but a ton of feedback, and hoping that we'll be able to see even more growth, that we can pick up where we left off, since it'll mean 2 years with them. I'm sad that I won't be able to start a new group a year earlier and have 2 years to really build them to the same point. But that's what I learned. And I hope this helps. And I really hope this has sound this time. Thank you so much for the opportunity, for believing in me, and for allowing me to help the students believe in themselves. I appreciate it a lot.